Chapter 1.
Kiara.
Are you pumped? My closest friend, Natalie, inquired. It was my wedding day, a union that would bring the two families together, with the hope of safeguarding my family. Yes, extremely, I replied, my voice laced with sarcasm as I rolled my eyes. Natalie rolled her gray, blue eyes at me while fixing my brown curly hair. I didn't even bother to glance at it. I couldn't care less about this marriage to the Russian. It was even worse that I had to move to the States with him, leaving behind my home, family, and friends. I really didn't want to do it. However, I knew I had no choice. Knowing how ruthless and merciless he was, I was certain he wouldn't hesitate for a second before sending me back home. That would trigger a war between the families, which my family couldn't afford. It annoyed me more than ever that I was in this situation. But I knew there was no other option. It was either this or face the dire consequences if things went differently. Remember the reason for this. My father's voice echoed in my mind. It was excruciating. My heart ached every time I thought about it. But I knew the purpose. So despite my reluctance, I had to give in. Especially since my family's, specifically my mother's, safety depended on it. Being the weaker family in the Mafia community, and with no son as an heir for my father, it was up to me to unite and ensure the family's safety, even if it meant a forced contract marriage. I would do my best to make it work, well, as much as I could. If not, my mother's life would be at stake. Although I was trained to fight and protect myself and my family, and I always made sure not to disgrace my family, nor was I the spoiled princess I was supposed to be, my father still used my mother to coerce me into doing what he wanted. This was a secret that no one, not even my mom, knew about. One night when Mom was asleep, my father took me to his office. I knew he didn't truly love her. He was only married to her for the status of having a wife. Even though there were stories of their deep love before marriage, and there was a time when I saw the love in their eyes, I couldn't understand how it had changed. But it had. Come on, Kiara, he's handsome. Plus, he's from a wealthy and powerful family, Natalie said with a smile. I couldn't fault her for being so excited. She knew nothing about my family being in the Mafia, where we came from, what we did, or how we lived. She was completely oblivious. All she saw was our wealth, and for that, I couldn't blame her for seeing this marriage as a blessing instead of my curse. If I were in her shoes, I might have thought the same. To be honest, I would have slapped myself for not wanting this marriage. It's ironic, isn't it? Come on, Natalie, let's go. The guests are already waiting, and Dad will come up to get us if we don't go down. We don't want that, I said, looking at my best friend in the mirror. I wondered when I'd see her again, have a proper conversation, or sit in our bedrooms and talk for hours. Even though she didn't know about my family, she was still my best friend, regardless of my family's actions. A small lie to keep her safe was better than putting her in danger that could cost her life. I could never forgive myself if anything happened to her. Oh, Kiara, are you crying? Natalie asked, turning me to face her. She wrapped her arms around me and hugged me. It was the first time I'd cried in front of her. As the only daughter of the Mafia Don, especially since my father didn't have a son, I couldn't show any weakness. It wasn't allowed, and I didn't need to be told. I always wanted to prove myself worthy of being my father's daughter. Even though he sometimes resented not having a son, and thought I wasn't worth his time or effort, I was usually the one who got him out of trouble rather than into it. I'll miss you so much, Nat, I whispered, hugging her tightly. Natalie pulled away, wiped my tears, cupped my cheeks, and smiled at me. Her eyes were also filled with tears. I knew my emerald green eyes would be bloodshot from crying, and I didn't want that right now. Everyone had to believe that I was happy and excited about this marriage. Oh, Kia, we'll talk every day, have video calls, phone calls, and text messages. I'll visit you in America whenever I can. You can show me around. You know I've never been there, Natalie said gently. I forced a smile. I wiped my tears and checked my appearance in the wedding dress one more time. The dress hugged my curves perfectly, enhancing my figure and showing me off. The lace, which was my mom's idea, covered the dress, giving it a more elegant look. I wasn't really interested. The wedding was the least of my concerns. It was my mother, Natalie, and Natalie's mom, Margaret, who chose my dress. Come on, love. Let's go before Dad comes up himself, I said, walking towards the door. Wait, your flower bouquet, Natalie said, handing me the white flower arrangement. I smiled, lifted my dress carefully, and walked out of my bedroom for the last time before going downstairs to see the guests waiting for me to walk down the aisle. To them, I was the beautiful bride marrying the most powerful mafia don. But to me, signing that wedding paper today was like signing my death certificate. "Princess, you look gorgeous," Dad said with a smile. We both knew we were being watched. I smiled back, knowing it's what he expected. He cupped my cheeks, kissed my forehead, and looked into my eyes. His eyes conveyed the same message he'd given me when he first told me about this marriage. The kiss was just for show in front of the guests, and I had to suppress a sarcastic laugh. "Remember why you're doing this?" Nikolay looked at me from beside his father. His icy, blue eyes met my green ones, both of us as cold as ice towards each other. We both loathed the fact that we were now destined to be together. "Kiara, my dear," Mom said, approaching me with a smile. She opened her arms and hugged me tightly. She looked proud as she saw her daughter becoming the bride of one of the most powerful mafia bosses, the future Mrs. Ivanov, the savior of the family. She showed her appreciation for what I was doing. "Mom, you look lovely," I said, smiling at her. She placed her hand on my lower back and gently pushed me towards my future husband, who was walking towards me. Probably under the pressure of his father, Dmitry Ivanov, who was looking at my father. They nodded at each other in greeting. I took a deep breath and stepped forward towards my husband-to-be, Nikolay. I greeted him coldly. He put an arm around my shoulder, and we kissed for show. After the quick peck, we looked into each other's eyes. "Kiara," he replied frostily. His sharp jaw tightened. I took a moment to study his face. Although I'd seen him countless times as I grew up, he had a neat beard, a muscular body visible under his designer suit, and a deep voice that would make any girl swoon. I had to stop myself from rolling my eyes at him, knowing his gun was under his jacket. Mine was strapped to my thigh as usual. "Let's get this over with," he said, and I nodded. This ceremony was taking way too long for my liking. The sooner we finished, the sooner we could leave, and the sooner I could get out of this dress. "Please," I muttered under my breath. My eyes met Vladimir's, Nikolay's right-hand man, best friend, and blood brother. They were inseparable. They'd grown up together. Their fathers were good friends. Dmitry was the don of the Russian Mafia family, and Ivan was his right hand. When their sons were born, they were like brothers. They lived together, and when Dmitry decided to retire when his son turned 25, he gave Nikolay his position, and Vladimir took over his father's role by default. Nikolay and I walked towards the table to sign our wedding agreement. Marrying a man I despised was never on my to-do list. But then again, we were once friends, long before puberty. He was 11 and I was 7. As we grew older, we sided with our own families, turning us against each other, especially when the English Mafia families attacked the Russians. We signed the paper. I looked at my new last name, Ivanov. Kiara Ivanov, wife of Nikolay Ivanov. I had to hold back a sigh and took a deep breath. Nikolay drank from the glass on the table and then handed it to me for a sip. We both agreed it was the right thing to do. I refused to lose my first kiss to a man I didn't love. Yes, I was 26 and a virgin. Blame it on my father, who never thought any man was good enough for me and had been preparing me to marry the Russian Don since I was young. No man dared to approach me for fear of losing his life. As time passed, I lost interest in finding the right man, knowing it would be a waste of time if I had no future with him. Congratulations to our new bride and groom, and welcome to the family, Mrs. Ivanov. Chapter 2. Nikolay. I watched as the girl, my wife, danced with her father before he handed her to me for our first dance as a married couple. This whole act was annoying me, but I knew I had to endure it a bit longer for the guests' sake. I didn't care what Dmitry thought. If we wanted this peace arrangement to work, I had to cooperate. "Lift your hands a bit higher if you don't mind," Kiara said, rolling her eyes at me. I raised my hand to her waist, just below her chest, being careful where she wanted me to touch. She acted as if she'd never been touched there before. A girl like her must have had many men at her feet. But I didn't judge. I couldn't care less about her past. "Believe me, I'd rather be anywhere else than having my hands on you," I whispered, pulling her closer. I knew my words were harsh, but we both didn't care. We knew and hated each other enough to show it whenever we could. I'm glad the feeling's mutual, she said, rolling her eyes and giving me a sarcastic smile. I twirled her and then brought her back to me. Our eyes met, cold and full of dislike. Indeed, it is, Mishka, I said. Oh, we're using nicknames now. How interesting, she said, batting her eyelashes. I was glad the music was loud enough so the guests couldn't hear us. I didn't want any trouble right now. I twirled her again and pulled her closer. Her back was against my chest as we swayed. I suggest you tone it down before things get out of hand, Mishka, I said, turning her around to face me. Even in heels, she barely reached my shoulders. Her body was small compared to mine. And if I don't, will you shoot me and end my misery? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Her voice was dripping with sarcasm. If it were that easy, yes. One bullet to your head, and we'd be done. But you know we need you alive and married to me, I said, rolling my eyes at her for thinking she could challenge me. Huh, too bad. You're stuck with me then, Kiara said, rolling her eyes and putting her hand on my shoulder. Our eyes met, blue and green, both showing our distaste for each other. We both knew and hated the reason for this marriage. We boarded the private plane after saying goodbye to Kiara's parents. She shed a few tears. I couldn't understand her worry about her mother, but Lillian assured her she'd call regularly. Her behavior confused me, but I didn't bother asking. I didn't really care anyway. Can I change out of this dress? Kiara asked once we were on board. I looked at her still in her wedding dress and nodded, pointing towards the bathroom. She nodded, grabbed a white leather bag, and headed that way.
Nikolay, Vladimir, he said.
My best friend and partner glared at me. I raised an eyebrow at him. Ivan and Dmitri were sitting at the front of the plane, waiting for us. They'd left earlier, bored with the ceremony.
What?
She's your bride. At least say more than 2 words to her, Vladimir said. I rolled my eyes and sat down. Just then, the door opened, and the girl emerged in gray sweatpants and a black long-sleeve shirt. She held her dress carefully and placed it on the chair across the aisle. She reached up to the overhead compartment, took out a bag on her own, and put it on the chair. She casually opened the bag, put the dress inside, all while Vladimir stared at me. I watched as she closed the bag, reached up to put it back in the compartment, but Dmitri took the bag from her, making her flinch. She looked at him as he put the bag back and smiled at him as he closed the compartment. You could have asked for help, dear, he said softly. I raised an eyebrow at him, but he ignored me. He kept his attention on the girl, who smiled at him. I was fine, Uncle Dmitri. Thank you for your help, she said gently. Dmitri nodded and watched her walk past him and sit down. He looked at me, shook his head, and went back to his seat without a word. Meanwhile, the girl put some things on the table. She took a cotton pad, poured some liquid on it, and started wiping her eyes. What are you doing? I asked. Removing my makeup, she replied, continuing to wipe her eyes. Do you want something to eat or drink? Vladimir asked. You didn't eat or drink much at the wedding, except for that one drink with Nikolay.
I'm okay, Vladimir.
Thanks, she said, putting the pad down and getting another one. She repeated the process several times. By the time she was done, the plane had taken off. I wondered how much time and effort she'd put into this wedding. She started removing the black pins from her hair, ran her fingers through it, and let out a sigh of relief. Then she got up and threw away the now soiled cotton pads. The stewardess brought juices. Kiara smiled, took a glass, drank from it, and placed it on the table. She opened the purse she'd put on the table, took out her tablet, and started reading. You don't seem like a bride, I commented, raising an eyebrow. Coming from the husband who's paying so much attention to me, she said, not looking away from her device. I didn't answer and opened my own laptop. Welcome home, Nikolay, Mom said with a smile as we entered the house. I smiled, wrapped my arms around her, and hugged her tightly. She and my sister Grace didn't attend the wedding. Dmitri refused because it was more of an agreement than a proper wedding, and he didn't trust the English families. Marrying Kiara didn't change the fact that we were still somewhat enemies. Hello, new groom, Grace teased, hugging me after Mom let go. I chuckled and hugged my little sister. She kissed my cheek, then hugged Vladimir, who smiled and wrapped his arms around her. We'd grown up like siblings, and we still acted like it. Kiara, dear, welcome. Mom greeted Kiara, who smiled politely. I had to stop myself from rolling my eyes at her attitude. Mom hugged Kiara, trying to make her feel welcome. I didn't really care about the girl. Looks like fate brought me a sister-in-law. Grace teased Kiara. Kiara smiled and shook her head. Grace raised an eyebrow at her, making her uncomfortable. I knew Grace didn't care for the bride, and she was showing it. Kiara looked down at her feet, and I could see her discomfort. Mom glared at me. Are you joining us for dinner? Claudia and Adrian should be home soon. Mom asked, looking at me. I walked over, cupped her cheeks, and kissed her forehead. She raised an eyebrow, waiting for my answer.
Invierno?
I have work, Mom. It's been postponed for a few days, I said, looking at Kiara, who raised an eyebrow. I'll be back late. Don't wait up. All right, Nick. Take care of yourself, Mom said gently. I smiled, nodded at Vladimir, and motioned for him to follow me to the office. We had a lot of work to catch up on. The wedding had delayed things, but not as much as it could have. I just didn't like the idea of this wedding since I didn't care about being with the woman. They could have just sent her to the States, and I wouldn't have cared. Boss, Vladimir asked as he entered my office. I looked at the papers from one of my clubs. The women there were supposed to follow up on some tasks I'd assigned. There were pictures of the men I wanted with the girls around them, getting them drunk for questioning. I could tell they had a lot to tell us. We're going to the Rosa de la Rosa. Melina just reported back. I said. Hashtag chapter 3.
Kiara.
I woke up to the sound of raindrops hitting my window, and a smile spread across my face. I adored the rain. It reminded me of home, of the days and nights Natalie and I would play outside in the rain. We'd often get scolded by her mom for coming inside, all wet. My mom would glare at me, but she couldn't say much to Natalie about it. I smiled at the memory and got out of bed to go to the bathroom for my morning routine. My thoughts drifted back to this marriage, which was turning out to be much worse and more difficult than I'd anticipated. I knew that despite my dislike for this arrangement, of being forced to marry a man who barely gave me a second look, I had to try to make this marriage work for my family. After freshening up, I dressed in normal black sweatpants and a white V-neck shirt. I tied my hair in a ponytail, wanting to go out and get some things for breakfast. I knew the house had supplies, and most of what I needed would be there. But I still wanted to see if I could find something else. I walked out of my bedroom quietly. The doors were all closed, so I assumed everyone was still asleep. The maids were the only ones up, doing their jobs, cleaning, or starting on breakfast. It was a bit hard to find the kitchen since I wasn't familiar with the house, and I wasn't sure if the maids would help me if I asked. I decided to just keep looking until I found it. Good morning, I said as I entered the kitchen. I saw a woman in her 50s cutting fruits. Her golden hair was tied in a bun. There was also a girl sitting on a chair. They both wore black dresses and white aprons. The girl stood up and smiled at me. Her brown eyes met my green ones, and her smile reached her eyes. Good morning, she said, looking me up and down. You must be the new arrival. This is my mom, Layla, the head of the servants. She'll teach you everything you need to know. I'm Madeline, but you can call me Maddie.
Kiara.
It's a pleasure to meet you, I said, smiling. But her eyes widened, and she took a step back. Her expression hardened when she heard my name, and I was confused. Are you Nikolay's wife? Maddie asked, looking me in the eye. I nodded, not knowing what to say. Madeline nodded back and stood next to her mom. Her eyes showed obvious anger and annoyance, and I looked down at my feet, feeling awkward. I came to ask if you needed me to get anything. I was thinking of making French toast, but I wasn't sure if you had the ingredients, I said, looking at the two women, who kept their eyes on me. Layla smiled genuinely and put the fruits aside. Madeline, on the other hand, was glaring at me. You don't have to do anything, dear. We got it covered, Layla said gently. I wanted to say something but decided not to, not wanting to bother the nice woman. Can I at least make some coffee? I asked, looking at Layla. She met my eyes, smiled, and gave me a small nod. Then she showed me where everything was to make coffee. I smiled, started heating the milk, and stirred the coffee. Would you two like some? There's no need to go to the trouble, Layla said softly. I don't mind. Please? Sure, I'll have a cup, Madeline said, raising an eyebrow and handing me her mug. I smiled, poured the coffee into a red mug and then into a pink one that Layla gave me. I sat down at the bar and sipped my coffee. How was your night? Did you sleep okay? Madeline asked. Yes, the jet lag gave me a bit of a hard time, but I was fine later. I replied with a smile. I knew they saw me as an intruder in this house, but I was in a tough situation that forced me here. I really wanted things to work, whether Nikolay believed it or not. The pressure on me for this marriage to succeed was something no one could understand. To Nikolay and his family, it was just a peacekeeping act. But for me, it was my mother's life and safety on the line if I made a single mistake. I see you've invaded our kitchen, Grace, Nikolay's sister said, raising an eyebrow. I raised an eyebrow back. Her blue eyes, a shade lighter than her brother's, met my emerald green ones, and I crossed my arms. Grace, dear, Layla started, but Grace smiled, kissed her cheek, and put her hand on Madeline's shoulder. Madeline put her hand on top of Grace's. They looked at me as if I was a nuisance sitting in their kitchen.
Don't worry, Layla.
I'm not here to talk to her. I just came for a glass of water and to tell you that Nikolay and the others are awake, Grace said, looking at Layla. My chest tightened, and I wanted to say something but stopped myself. I knew anything I said would be used against me. This was her house, and I was the unwanted bride. I walked past Grace to the sink, poured out the coffee, washed the mug, and walked out of the kitchen without a word. I headed for the door to go outside. I'd rather not stay here and be insulted. Where do you think you're going? Nikolay asked from behind me. I didn't turn around as I opened the door. I knew I didn't have the keys to get back in, but I didn't care. I just wanted to leave before getting more insulted. I asked you a question. Hell, I said, turning to face the Russian boss. He raised an eyebrow at my answer, and I rolled my eyes. I'm going to hell. With that, I turned around, walked out, closed the door, and headed towards the house gates. My wallet and purse were inside, but I didn't care. My phone in my back pocket had all my cards and what I needed. By the way, I heard from behind me. Nikolay had followed me part way into the garden. I turned, raising an eyebrow. My anger was obvious on my face. He frowned when he saw my expression but didn't ask. He took my hand, opened my palm, and dropped the keys in it. I figured you didn't want to walk to hell. Thanks, but I don't want her car, I said, putting the keys back in his hand. He raised an eyebrow and pushed the keys into my front pocket. I'm not asking. You're taking the car. I didn't think you'd be stupid enough to take a cab, but I guess I was wrong, Nikolay said, rolling his eyes. Oh, look at you being so concerned, I said sarcastically. Believe me, Mishka, I'm not concerned. The car was bought for you by Dmitri. I wouldn't care if you walked, Nikolay said angrily. I nodded and walked away without answering. The garage is the other way, he called after me. Screw you, Nikolay Ivanov. Chapter 4. Nikolay. I don't get it. Why didn't you tell her you got her the car? Vladimir asked as we entered the office. He'd heard my argument with a furious Kiara. I sat down in my chair, and he took the one opposite me, as usual when we talked. I couldn't understand what had upset her, especially since we'd hardly spoken. I didn't bother asking. First, she wouldn't have accepted it if it was from me. Second, I don't want her to know I'm getting her anything. And third, she was dumb enough to want to take a cab, I said, raising an eyebrow at Vladimir, who shook his head. It was true that I'd bought the car for her before the wedding, knowing she'd need it if she went out. I'd even hired a driver for her, but I doubted she'd use him now. I didn't really care as long as she didn't put herself in danger with my enemies. She could rot in hell for all I cared. And how are you two going to make this marriage work? Vladimir asked, raising an eyebrow. He was annoyed with my attitude, but it was my life, and it was none of his business. If I was married on paper, that's all it was. The girl knew it too, so there was no need to pretend at home. Is this our biggest problem now? I don't care about this marriage, Vladimir, I said, getting annoyed with his questions. He shook his head, knowing he was the only one who could do that, besides Grace. That girl wouldn't listen to me even if I held a gun to her head, and of course, there was Mom. No question there. Can we change this stupid topic? It's getting annoying.
Sure.
We have other things to discuss. What are we going to do about Wilson? That bastard has been plotting behind our backs, and he's the one who wanted a business alliance, Vladimir asked. I tapped my finger on the glass desk, looking at the glass of water. I was thinking about all the things I could do to that traitor for breaking a deal he'd begged for. And everyone wonders why I hate dealing with the English. He's Scottish, actually, Vladimir said, stopping me. I glared at him, and he knew he was provoking me. The amusement in his eyes was obvious. My eyes were cold as I stared at him. Vladimir, do you have a death wish today? Just ask, and I'll end it without a gun, I said, looking him in the eye. He laughed, raised his hands in mock surrender. His muscles flexed. My blue eyes met his brown ones, and I could see the mockery in his eyes. He knew I was annoyed, but he didn't care. Nah, you wouldn't do it. You'd miss me too much, Vladimir teased. I shook my head at his behavior. The office door was knocked, and our expressions hardened. All the playfulness was gone as I called. Come in. I expected one of the maids. But when the door opened, my little sister, Claudia, smiled at me. Her blonde hair was in a ponytail, and her green eyes met my blue ones. I hadn't seen her the day before, as I'd gone out before she and Adrian got home. I smiled, moved my chair back, and stood up. She ran into my arms and hugged me tightly. I kissed the top of her head and pulled away to look at her. She smiled brightly. Mom said you were in your office. Adrian said we should wait, but I had other plans, Claudia said, smiling. I shook my head and kissed her head again. She and Adrian would be turning 17 in a few months. They had such different personalities that it was hard to believe they were twins. Sometimes I even had a hard time believing it, and they were my siblings. Vladimir, Claudia said, smiling as he got up and hugged her. Princess, Vladimir said, using the old nickname we'd given her when she was a child. He knew she was like his little sister. We might not be blood brothers by birth, but we were by choice. There was no doubt about it. Victor is back, and so is Alexei, Claudia said. I rolled my eyes. Are you going to start working with the guards or something? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Yes, since you won't let me help with your dirty work, I'll work with the guards until I get promoted, Claudia said, crossing her arms. Vladimir, and I laughed at her attitude. She rolled her eyes at me. I raised an eyebrow back and then ran towards her, picked her up over my shoulder. She squealed and punched my back. Nikolay, put me down. No, I said, walking with her in my arms. Vladimir smirked and opened the office door. We walked out with an annoyed Claudia in my arms. She kept punching me, which actually amused me. Nikolay, put your sister down, Mom said, raising an eyebrow as I entered the dining room. Dmitri was watching me as I put Claudia down. But instead of going to the table, she playfully attacked me, hitting my chest. I shook my head, took her hands, and kissed her knuckles. She smiled, and then playfully glared at me. You two are weird, Adrian said, standing up and walking over to hug me. Then he hugged Vladimir, and Alexei and Victor came over to greet me. They were smiling teasingly, knowing I was now married. Where's your bride? Mom asked, frowning in confusion. Going to hell, Grace said, rolling her eyes. I knew she'd heard Kiara snap at me when she left the house after being insulted. Nikolay? She went out a while ago, I said, looking at Grace. Her expression told me she knew I was aware of what she'd done. I didn't want to upset Mom, but I knew I'd talk to her about it after breakfast. Where could she be going? Especially as a newly-wed bride, Mom asked, frowning. Her annoyance was clear. I was about to answer when Kiara walked into the dining room, carrying a brown paper bag. Her expression was calm as she took out a bottle from the bag. Sorry I'm late. I wanted strawberry juice and couldn't find any in the kitchen, so I went to the store to get it, she said. Chapter 5.
Kiara.
I stormed into the garage, my anger boiling over as I thought about Grace's cruel words. They were so harsh, and I didn't know how to respond without getting myself into a mess I couldn't handle. So, I was forced to stay quiet and walk out, letting her insult me. Now, they'd probably mock me, thinking I was being childish for leaving like that. Yes, I admit it was a bit over the top, but given the situation, I had no other choice. But I wasn't going to let her think I left because of her. I didn't want them to know they'd hurt me. It went against everything I'd been taught. I pressed the key fob to unlock the car Nikolay had given me. I raised an eyebrow when the lights of a white Range Rover flashed, indicating it was unlocked. I looked at the key in my hand. It was indeed for a Range Rover.
Sporty.
I like it. Sorry I'm late. I wanted strawberry juice and couldn't find any in the kitchen, so I went to the store to get it, I said as I walked into the dining room. Everyone turned to look at me. I walked to the table and placed the juice bottle on it. I could feel Nikolay's eyes on me as I walked. He clearly hadn't expected me to come back. I glanced at Grace, who rolled her eyes at me. I ignored her and walked past the men to Nikolay's mom, Mia. She'd indicated for me to sit next to her. Dmitry smiled at me and I nodded, giving him a small smile. He and Ivan shared a proud look at my calm reaction. How did you sleep, dear? How are you feeling after the long flight? Mia asked gently, turning to me. Her green eyes met mine, and I couldn't help but smile at her kindness. It was so different from her son and daughter, who glared at me every chance they got. But I didn't care. I wasn't a spoiled brat to be bothered by their childish behavior. If they thought I was, they were wrong. I'm fine, love. Thank you for asking, I said politely. Her kindness was so touching. She put her hand on mine and squeezed it reassuringly. I knew this wasn't how a bride should spend her first night married, away from her husband. Nikolay had given me my own room, clearly trying to avoid me. His family's attitude showed they felt the same way. It hurt, but I wasn't going to dwell on it. What was done was done. I was married to Nikolay, and we either had to accept it or I'd face the consequences I didn't want to think about. Why don't you and Nikolay go out today? Try to get to know each other, Mia suggested, pushing her blonde hair out of her eyes. I looked at Nikolay, and he glared at me. It was obvious we both didn't want to. Maybe another day, love. I'm still tired from the trip, and I haven't settled in yet.
Oh, nonsense.
Go out for the day. The maids can take care of things. You go and have fun, Mia said, interrupting me. I looked at Nikolay, hoping he'd say something to change his mother's mind, but he just ate in silence, watching us. I closed my eyes, not knowing what to say. It annoyed me, but I nodded at Mia, who was being sincere and trying to help. I agreed to go out with her son for the day. Since he didn't object, he must have his reasons. Where are you going, Nikolay? Mia asked as her son stood up and ran his fingers through his black hair. I frowned, confused. He didn't even look at me as he walked to his mom and kissed her forehead. She smiled at him, and my heart skipped a beat at the sight of their affection. Despite his tough exterior, he clearly loved and respected his mom. I have work, Mom. If I'm going out later, I might as well get some work done first, Nikolay said calmly. He nodded at me and left through the door. Vladimir followed him shortly. The other two men also left, leaving Grace, Dmitry, me, and I assumed Claudia and Adrian, the youngest Ivanov siblings. I'll go check on some things and get ready before going out, I said, excusing myself from the table. I wanted to give the family some privacy. I'd learned long ago to know when to leave, when I wasn't welcome. Kiara, darling. I'll start getting ready, dear. I need to choose what to wear. Most of my things are still in my bags, and I can't go out in sweatpants and a shirt, I said, smiling at Mia to stop her. I didn't want to be rude by leaving without eating. She looked at my empty plate and nodded. All right, dear. Call Maddie if you need help. I'm sure you two can get things done faster together, Mia said gently. I nodded, leaned down to kiss her cheek, nodded at Dmitry and left the dining room, heading to my bedroom. I knew Mia meant well, but I was sure Maddie had more important things to do. Nice save, Nikolay said as he met me in front of my bedroom door. I raised an eyebrow at him, and he just smirked. I'm talking about going to hell to get strawberry juice. Don't you have work to do? I asked, raising an eyebrow. He smirked, and I knew he was trying to get a reaction out of me, but I didn't know why. He hadn't really done anything wrong. You're really naive if you believed that excuse.
I was waiting for you, Nikolay said.
I glared at him, crossing my arms, waiting for him to finish. I ignored the insult. I didn't want to argue. What do you want, Nikolay? I asked, raising an eyebrow at the Mafia Don with a smirk on his face. I didn't like where this conversation was going. We're going out today for Mom's sake. Don't think I'm doing this for you, and I still don't want anything to do with you, Nikolay said rudely. I rolled my eyes and nodded.
I felt the same way. He was so full of himself.
I already know we're going out for your mom. And trust me, the feeling is mutual, I said, giving him a sarcastic smile. His smirk turned into a frown.
Good.
I don't want you thinking this changes anything. Our marriage is still just a contract, he said. I know it's a contract, Nikolay. I married you to protect my family, for a stupid alliance. You don't need to remind me on our second day of marriage, I snapped, stopping him. He raised an eyebrow at my outburst, and I glared at him. The only reason I was married to him was to protect my mom. I knew her life was at stake. The family alliance meant nothing compared to her. My dad had made it clear that if I didn't marry, I'd have no part in the family's future. Now that I was married to a Russian, I was sure my dad and the others wouldn't let me have any say in the family dynasty.
Good.
Now that's clear. I'll wait for you to get ready. The sooner we get this day over with, the better, Nikolay said calmly. I was angry at his words, but I knew he didn't care. All he cared about was fulfilling his part of the contract. The rest was up to me.
All right.
If you'll let me into my room to get ready, that would be great. You're not invisible, you know, I said, glaring at him. Nikolay moved away from the door and walked to his bedroom, which was right in front of mine. I raised an eyebrow at the arrangement. I was sure his mom had something to do with it. If it were up to him, he'd probably put me in the attic. But it didn't matter. I knew what I needed to do to stay out of trouble. But first, I had to get through today.